So I told you that I'm a little disappointed that they relegated pen work to an extension in Scratch rather than built right into Scratch. I've been teaching Scratch for years, and I was in both in my classes at UNI, at the college I teach at, with this course with pre-service teachers, or in-service teachers, and what I do with undergraduates as pre-service teachers, and when I'm working with kids at the Coder Dojo, we actually used to frequently start rather with an animation, which I do like animation, but with the idea of pen work and pen up and pen down and drawing things. And I liked starting with that because, as you saw I did with this course, I like to start with basic algorithms and having you work with only one sprite. And there's only so many things you can do with only one sprite. And in this course, we did animation this time around. But in the old days, I used to do pen work, and I used to have them play with some things like we just did with squares and things like that. And then what I had them do was to start to experiment with the idea of drawing something meaningful and drawing their initials. And so I always used to ask my students to create their initials. And so here's a program from a student I was working with who creates out three initials, all with one sprite, all in one long piece of code. Well, almost. And I slipped there and you got to see there's a second piece of code. But let me explain this code that you're looking at right now. This is code that I work with a Coder Dojo, which is a group of kids ages roughly 8 to 14 who come to the library in my community once a month and learn about programming. And we always start them out with Scratch. And I was working with a kid who was relatively new to our dojo, and he'd been working with Scratch for a little bit. And so one of the assignments that he was asked to do was to draw out his initials. And I was wandering around the room, and I came over just as he was finishing up the program that you see right here. And I was kind of admiring this, and it looks kind of cool. And I noticed that in the middle of his code, he has a block here called half circle. Notice this, that in his code, he has his places, everybody. He has that J starts here, so he draws the crossbar of the J, and then he backtracks, and then he turns 90 degrees, and he makes the line down here for the J. And then there's this block called half circle, and he makes this half circle right here. Then he picks his pen up and he moves down for the B, and for the B he made the two half circles of the B, and then made the sidebar on them. And then when he made the U, he did the sidebar, and he made the half circle at the bottom. This is really cool. He's using a block called half circle, and you've been in this course for a while now, and you've never seen a block called half circle anywhere in Scratch. And I figured maybe one of the older kids had shown him how to get this, or maybe he'd been poking around on the Scratch website and he'd figured out how to add this idea of a half circle that's something new. And so I asked him, I said, where did you learn about half circle? How did you come up with that idea? And again, I really expected him to say that he found it online or he found it somewhere else. And what he said to me was, well, I've been working with code.org in my school. By the way, I love code.org. I think Scratch and code.org are brilliant collaborators. They go together brilliantly. You use code.org to get sort of the fundamental ideas of programming, and then you use Scratch to really free up the creativity of your kids once they understand the fundamentals of programming. But enough of that. He said to me, we've been doing code.org in my school, and we learned just a couple of days ago about the idea of functions. And he said, I learned that a function is a piece of code that you're going to use more than one time. And so rather than repeating the code over different places, you create a function that you simply call when you need to use that set of code. And I have to admit, I was absolutely floored, because he gave me the textbook definition of a function. A function is a section of code that you create so that you can call it over and over again. I mean, that's basically verbatim the definition in the code.org curriculum. And he gave me, he did a better job. He gave me the verbatim definition from the code.org curriculum. And that in and of itself didn't surprise me, because kids can learn to memorize things and spit things back. But what floored me was he not only heard that definition and could repeat it to me, but he understood what it meant. He understood where it came out to. What he said to me was, I looked at my initials and I realized I was going to have a half circle 4 times in my code to create my initials. And so rather than repeating that code 4 different times, I just went digging for how could I create my own command for a block called half circle. This kid was, I think, 9. He gave me a textbook definition of a function and had gone out digging in Scratch and figured it out entirely on his own. Now, I'll take a step back. Kids who come to a coder dojo to have fun programming on a Saturday afternoon aren't your average kid. I'm not saying that every kid in your classroom is that smart and could do that, but many of them are. And this kid just did that. And so that is the idea behind a function. I'm going to stop this video now, and in the next video we're going to look at actually how the function works, and we're going to translate it to how we ourselves can create our own blocks, our own functions in Scratch.